talking about over the last couple of days is, unless you were in the business in the 1980s, this is as scary as anybody's seen it. And very few of the management teams of the operators we work for were in the business in the 80s. I was actually an investor in the helicopter operating industry in the 1980s, and I can tell you it felt as scary as it feels now, but no worse. And so the bad news is this is as bad as I've seen it, and I've been watching the industry for 30 plus years, but it's not worse than it was then, and the world comes around.
Yeah, look, I think it's sobering. I was going to say this was a pretty depressing 2 days, and I'm not even sure why I bothered to come over. But look, I think we're...
Sorry, can we have that as a testimonial?
Yeah. Look, I know we're talking a lot about oil and gas, and that is the bulk of our business, and I'm sure Crispin will sort of augment this bit. But I mean, there are other segments of the market, and they are doing in some respects better. So I think there are opportunities out there. I think with respect to oil and gas customers, again, I think what we're hearing is, yeah, it's as bad as they've seen it. You know, they are having to deal with excess capacity, with customers who want them to cut more and more and more. And as some of the other speakers have said, we as an industry have to be creative. I think that help. Manufacturers have to be part of that, and ultimately finding the next use for this aircraft. If it's not in oil and gas, it's something else. These helicopters have very long lives. I think that is one of the best things about the asset class, and it's important for the industry to find that next life. And maybe it's oil and gas, maybe it's onshore, maybe it's EMS, maybe it's sort of something else.
Are you glad you're at a leasing company and not still running an operator?
I am very glad, yeah. Yeah, no, look, the operating business is a tough one. It's always been a tough one. Leasing, may certainly be going through its own sort of trials right now, but yeah, I prefer the leasing business to the operating business.
Crispin?
Well, the only comment I'd make, actually, following on that last presentation, is really that I think one has to differentiate between waste and efficiency. I think that there has been quite a bit of waste whilst the oil price was over 100. So I think the waste comes out and maybe some efficiency, but obviously it is a great worry for everyone in the offshore market.
Two of you have got deliveries coming this year. One of you sensibly chose not to.
I don't think that.
You agree, did you say?
No, I don't.
How worried are you about your pipeline of aircraft coming this year?
Actually, not very worried at all, to be frank. We've got about 18 new aircraft delivering. We're taking about 1 or 2 a month at the moment, and of those 18, all but a couple are already placed. But we're very different to the other lessors, I'd say. Well, not necessarily Israel, but certainly way behind. And milestone, as far as very interesting listening to Dan yesterday, mentioning that 2/3 of their fleet were in the offshore oil and gas market, which is a big exposure. Our offshore oil and gas exposure today by value is less than 45%. By the end of this year, fingers crossed all going well, which of course is a big if, I suppose, will be around about 30%. So we are much more balanced towards EMS and other applications and not offshore oil and gas.
And is that luck, Crispin?
No, it's careful judgment. Right from the beginning. No, we've only got 2 heavies in the entire fleet. Primarily an Augusta vessel, rather than Mechanica helicopters, 139 on Lessor. And we've deliberately gone for a platform that gives us a variety of different roles.
Okay. If I can just jump in on this, I don't want to cut you off on line positions, but actually I want to jump on the comment you made about Dan, because I really give Dan Roosevelt a lot of credit for what he did in the conversation, because a lot of what we've been talking about, if you will, is we've been talking about the weather. And Dan did a great job of outlining what I would say, talking about the climate or the ecosystem. And thinking back again to prior downturns in the oil industry, what's the same is 2 of the 3 things that I think are dramatically affecting it. Is the same is obviously demand is dramatically off because of the oil price. 2 is the long life of the assets. They're going to be around for a very long time. That's been the case for a very long time, and obviously Dan was talking about how that's part of the problem. But the third thing that's structurally different that didn't exist before is the presence of large speculative line positions. And so obviously I have a bias here because we don't have speculative line positions. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't exist in the marketplace, but if you look at what is the big overhang that's dramatically changing the market now, Crispin, you all have done a great job, and you've been very fortunate that you don't have a lot of oil and gas, but mathematically that limits your growth, because if you look at where the value is in the industry, if you don't get a lot of oil and gas, you're not going to be huge in the industry like a Milestone, like a Waypoint. And so the only thing that I would bring to this is that we focus on this difference in the marketplace and bring some rationality to it, in the sense that having 50% of heavy helicopters having been on speculative order for the last 2 years is an unbelievably different and dangerous thing for the.
Okay, can I just comment on that? Because coming from an operator, where frankly we had an order, but it was all speculative, and I would, no, look, honestly, I would argue that operator or lessor, we're making bets on aircraft types and what we think the market's going to go, and there were very few orders placed, I believe, by CHC, Bristow, Europe, PHI, that didn't have a fair amount of speculation in them, because the oil companies had the ability to not renew these contracts, to move their assets around. Come back to your question on, again, worried about order positions. Look, I may be not as relaxed as Crispin. Maybe as I get a little bit older, I'll get a little more relaxed. But look, a large part of our order book is targeted at the EMS and parapublic market. Those placements have gone fine, and we have a certain amount of flexibility, as do a number of the operators, and so we haven't necessarily taken a whole bunch of aircraft that we didn't want to take too much time, and I would say sort of somewhat modulated. So I worry about having to place what I have to place. I mean, this is not a great environment. We're competing against excess capacity. And again, it comes back to having to be creative, and I'm heartened by the fact that you see all the manufacturers reducing their output, and they don't ultimately want to produce whitetails. And I think as that continues, and as aircraft move out of one service and into another, you're eventually back to a balance of supply and demand.
Following on from Bill's point, do you think that the fact we got to 50% oil and gas was really just a function of, the newness of leasing companies, or is it always going to be like that?
I don't know. I think we got to so much oil and gas because, why did Jesse James rob banks? Because that's where the money was, right? I mean, there was a lot of demand. The push towards deep water, all that activity, and needing to replace a lot of aircraft that were older.
Yeah,
that's what drew everyone's attention.
But also, I think a lot of people were looking for growth, and the quickest way to grow is to buy large helicopters, high investment. And I think Milestone, don't get me wrong, I'm saying Milestone have done an extremely good job. They've timed the market well.
So you're not saying that?
I have said that, but the point I'm saying is that, from our point of view, we have never gone for just growth for growth's sake. It has always been to be cautious. We're in aviation, lessor helicopters, they're just part of our business. We're into the freight market and the passenger aircraft as well. So it's a balance. You don't need to be things.
Dan admitted that his presentation was very different to the pitch book that had out 18 months ago. How are your investors? Each of you has got private equity investors. How are they panicking, or are they just taking a long-term view?
Our 80% of our capital is family money. It's two large families, the Soros family and Michael Dell's family. I think they made their bet on Waypoint predicated on the long-term demand for energy and the mission-critical services that helicopters provide. So they're very data intensive. They ask lots of questions. They've got reams of people who are looking at macro cycles outside. So I think they worry about things. I think everybody has to worry about credit and risk. We can worry about Brazil and what's going to happen there. But again, from a fundamental, what's their belief in a long-term value of the business? No, they're not. And that's why we continue to hire people, while we continue to originate new business. As much as we focus on oil and gas, diversifying away from oil and gas, I think this fourth quarter was probably our largest or most significant quarter in terms of sale leasebacks in the oil and gas business. So, very much keep doing what we're doing, keep building out the platform, and keep diversifying the business.
We have a rather different approach. We are working through our order book. We are not in the sale-leaseback market that much at all. As far as we're concerned, we're not really in the business of providing liquidity necessarily, or indeed working capital for the operators. We prefer to go through our own order book.
Why not to some extent?
The economics stack up better for us, and in fact you are running the risk of residual values also.
I guess we're sort of sitting in a continuum here, and we're at the far end of the continuum, which is we're mostly focused on sale and leaseback. We do new aircraft if the customer asks us to do it, and our shareholders are very supportive. Our shareholders at GSO, which is part of the Blackstone Group, the fund that we're owned by is called the Capital Solutions Fund, and they are experts at, and through them, we are experts at providing capital when markets dislocate, and that's what's going on right now. And so most of the conversations we're having with operators is not how do I add capacity, obviously not going on right now, but how do I get enough liquidity to make it for the next 3 years, and now some of them are saying for the next 5 years. And that's what we're very, very active on, and providing capital, mostly in the form of leases, but also in other forms.
It's interesting, Crispin, because you're going to grow enormously this year. I'm not talking about you personally. But as a leasing company, you're going to almost double this year, is that right? Purely from the order book. You guys, in theory, could have a double down and grow even faster this year. Is that
I don't know that that's real. I mean, again, it's a question of scale. So no, we cannot double down and grow even faster in this market. I don't think there's enough business to do, especially, as I said, we talk about risk. I think I can say this for a public forum, but look, our pricing is going up. Like we are, there was a point in time where the three of us and others were sort of competing on every deal, and it was, it's important to sort of be there. And I mean, there are certainly deals that we will compete very hard for, but we look at things with a much more jaundiced eye at the moment, and I think that's the way banks are going to be looking at operators and lessors, and ultimately you want to make sure that you're sort of going to get through this period of difficulty.
And actually, I take that even further. We grew much slower than we thought we would 3 years ago when we partnered with GSO, and that's been because we're very conservative, and we think risk, meaning lease pricing risk, was completely mispriced in the market. And we think, we agree with that, we think it's finally going to be priced much more accurately and correctly in the marketplace for the risk that people are taking. And to Crispin's point, when you're doing sale leasebacks, you're by definition doing older equipment at times, and you've got to be a lot more careful about how you price yourself.
It's interesting, isn't it, with operating leasing, because it's such a long-term business. We probably won't know for another 5 years whether you priced it right or not, will we?
I think that's a fair assessment.
Or you won't actually know if you priced it right until you sell. That's at the end of a leasing game. I'm afraid it's everything else is just work in progress until you actually exit the asset.
Or in Milestone's case.
Yeah. Well, they've exited.
Yeah.
The shackles.
Do we have any questions in the audience?
Finished.
Or comments? Yeah, we've got one. John's coming in to ask Crispin a horrible question, I'm hoping.
A particular term for Crispin. But Ed made the remark that he thought that there was speculative buying within the operators as well as within the lessors. And it reminds me of the position in 1989 when the fixed-wing market went through a really bad period because it turned out that the big leasing companies that had just come into being in the 80s and the airlines were both buying for the same use. And I'd like the panel, all of them, to comment on whether they think that that is part of the problem today, that in fact everybody had in mind what the likely demand from the oil companies was going to be, and that the lessors and the operators were buying for the same purpose and the same idea of contracts, the same number of contracts.
I think there might be some of that, but again, going back to my time at ERA, it was a tender in Brazil where it was clear that everybody was ordering for the same contract, and the manufacturers were building aircraft for the same contract. And so at the end of the day, you had something like 60 or 70, if I recall, medium aircraft offered across a couple of different platforms. And when the final decisions were made and it was 15 helicopters, people realized, oh, maybe I shouldn't have bought all these. And frankly, I think that's where a leasing company kind of provides some benefit, because whether it's Crispin or whether it's us, we can offer the same aircraft with financing to 3 different bidders. And I think what has changed is even the way the manufacturers will look at things. They will, if it's an important tender, they're going to set aside slots It doesn't matter who wins, they will then have the slot for the winner. So while there